I do think to your point, like AI is allowing us all to become more entrepreneurial in that it's allowing us to try new things. It's allowing us to explore ideas in new ways and like actually launch things that in the past would have taken just so much time.
All right. I am here with Aryel CN Flown, and I'm so excited to be here today, talking with her a little bit about her transition to being a little bit more of a generalista or a generalist in her role. And we'll get into that in just a second. But Aryel and I go way back. We actually worked at LinkedIn together on the UER team. Funny story, nobody else besides LinkedIn calls user experience UER. It's always UXR. At LinkedIn, it's UER. We were on that team together. Aryel and I worked really closely on the enterprise side. I always really enjoyed working with you, just so you know. And I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the recent transition that you've made from user experience research or user experience research management as well over to product management. So I think what's really interesting about this story is it's not just about like career change. I think it's what happens when you expand what you can do, but also keeping your UX lens. So I'm calling this the sort of generalista movement, or at least what the way that I see UX expanding, doing lots of different things, expanding into different roles, different capabilities, and different skill sets to be able to unblock yourself or potentially move faster or execute in ways that the organization needs or that you want to go as a professional. So I feel like we're at this really interesting intersection point. And Aryel, you represent, I think, a little bit of that fluidity and maybe some of the evolution of what's happening in UX. So awesome to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. It's really fun to get to hang out.
Cool. Okay, so let's start first on your day-to-day as a UX researcher, but also a UX research manager at LinkedIn. What did you do then versus what are you doing now? So what's changed?
Yeah, totally. So it's interesting because when I was an IC on your team, our setup, I would say, at LinkedIn was pretty different. Like we were essentially like our own ops team. So I was running my own UX research studies, but I was also doing my own scheduling. I was, we didn't even have like a transcription service when I started. So like, I would be like listening, I would be pulling quotes, like doing all sorts of stuff. And just like, over the last like 8 to 10 years, so much has changed. I think a company our size, of course, would have an ops team. So, in my time from IC to then manager to then senior manager, I helped kind of think about our tool set, think about transcription services, push for some of those things, work with our ops team on like how can we make some of these processes more efficient. So I would say as an IC, I was very focused on running these studies day to day, setting up the logistics of them, setting up, if we were going to do a trip or something like that and take folks on it, there was, just a lot of ops burden. And then as I moved into management, it became much more of a strategic role where I was thinking about what should we be focusing on. So for example, last half when I was still a senior manager and I was, kind of juggling both roles actually, one of the projects that I kicked off was just more of a deep dive into Gen Z and how they were thinking about LinkedIn, how they were thinking about career and networking in general, because I could tell it was a gap and we were getting a lot of questions. But so kind of moved from obviously execution to thinking about what should we be doing, having those conversations with senior leadership, making sure our insights were being translated, thinking about our back. And, I was doing an AI moderation tools pilot. So just a lot more like strategic thinking about how our organization should run and where my team that was focused on consumers should be investing our time. So that was what I was doing before.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a natural shift from sort of like more of the operational side and, structuring studies, then thinking about, well, where do we focus and what do we know or what's a potential strategic gap? Let's start to think about, well, what I'm curious about is, well, what's that first moment, right? Where you were like, maybe what I'm doing is something that could be applied, or maybe I'm actually doing a different role. So like, when did you first think, I want to be a PM? Like, what was that moment for you?
That's such a funny question because I honestly never had the thought I want to be a PM. I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. So, we had a CPO who is no longer LinkedIn CPO as of the end of last year, but we had a CPO who for about a year really, really was interested in this idea of full stack builders and like how can we use these AI tools to make each of us individually more efficient, but also like where it makes sense to start to blur lines. So if I have a designer who's really, really, interested in not only designing the product, but actually like structuring it, thinking about it more strategically and like managing the team around it, like, could they do that? Could we start to play with that? And I saw us talking about this a lot as a company, even in like, some of our biggest meetings, like this idea. And, for 6 months or so, I was having conversations with people. What does this mean? How are we going to actually operationalize this as a product team? And, what I kind of came to realize was we were all sort of like waiting for someone to take the first step and like try this out and see what it might look like. And I was having a conversation with my career coach. That's, like a benefit that we have at LinkedIn that I love and always take advantage of. And I was talking to her about this challenge that I was running into, or it's like, we're talking about this, I'm interested in it, it seems really cool. And she was like, well, what if you 6 months from now, wanted to manage a team of full stack builders? What would you do today? What would be like the first small steps that you would think about doing today? And so she and I like brainstormed them. I talked to, like close friends at work about kind of what I was thinking. And long story short, I reached out to first one person who mentioned that they, kind of had a gap on their team in terms of product management. And I was like, hey, I really want to build out some of these core competencies that I haven't focused on, obviously, as much as a UX research manager. And the first answer, I think too, I don't know who will be listening to this, but I think there's just like a lot of like, it's just like socially weird. Like it feels like, especially at a big tech company, that like our roles are very separate. Like if you're a designer, that's your identity and like stay in your lane. And if you're an engineer, stay in your lane. And like that's just kind of, I think, like the general vibe. It like feels a little bit strange because you're like, is it okay that I'm even asking about this, thinking about it, whatever. But the fact that we've been talking about it as a company for so long really kind of like gave me that push and that confidence. And the first person was like, let me think about it. Like maybe I can think of like a UX specific project that you could take on. Like, let me think about it. And so I went to another one of my close partners, a product management director, and I told him like, hey, I'm really interested in this idea of full stack building. And like, it seems like the most natural kind of like first place to push into is product. I would love to just like take on a couple projects. And again, my head was still in not like I'm going to become a product manager, but if I were to, kind of move from a manager of just UX researchers to a manager of full stack builders, like what are the skills that I need to build and learn and like, I need to do a couple projects myself. And that person was like, oh, yeah, totally. If you can commit, I'll give you 3 APM projects. And I was like, okay, sweet. And then the first person I had talked to messaged me like that day or the next day and was like, hey, actually, can we talk? I have a project. So I ended up having my job as a senior manager for basically, like most of consumer. And then I had a job as an APM on one team, and then I had a job as, a PM on this other team. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have 3 jobs. So that's how it all started. So again, my headspace wasn't like, I want to become a PM. It was like, is this idea of full stack builder real? What would it look like in practice? What would be like the first skills I would need to build? And my plan was to then like take on a couple design projects. So that's kind of where it all started.
That's really cool. I think that your immediate sort of inclination was not to label what you were doing as a role. Which I think is really, really interesting. You're like, actually, it's just a collection of different skill sets that I need to understand and internalize through experience. I'm so curious, like, what were like the skill sets that you felt that you had, and what were the skill sets that you felt that you needed to learn?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I really, really understood people using LinkedIn. I had for years, like, had these one-on-one conversations with them, listened into other people having one-on-one conversations, talked to my researchers about what they were hearing and what it meant. Like, I really felt like I had a deep understanding. I was, part of the team that built our original sets of jobs to be done for each of our audiences that we had defined. Like, just felt like I had this very deep understanding of what people needed and what was kind of like missing from our current LinkedIn offering. I felt like I didn't actually know like how something like got into a production environment in LinkedIn.
Mm.
Like I have an idea and now what happens and like how do you ramp something? Does the product manager, like, what does the product manager do in that? What does the engineer do? Like reviewing the results and, experimentation plans, tracking specs. There, like, it just felt like there was a little bit of a black box of like how you got from this really cool idea to like getting funding and building something. And I really wanted to understand what that like last mile, uh, what it entailed and how you did it.
Cool. I love that. I want to switch gears a little bit because, we could talk about, okay, the specific skill sets and, how are you finding that? But I'm really curious about what you said before, which is that, roles are a really important thing, especially in big places like LinkedIn. I found the same when I was at LinkedIn. I found the same at Uber. I think I'm working in a smaller place or, a startup inside of a big place now. And so roles are a little bit more flexible. But I think being the first mover in any sort of situation is often a little bit unnerving, a little bit scary. So I'm curious, like you made the decision, you said, okay, I'm going to go for it. What did you say to your team? What did you say to your manager? Like, and what was the response as people started to sort of internalize your move in this?
Yeah. So I think the conversation was so different than it would have been 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Because I think back then, the only way to kind of do something like this was if you clearly had intent to move in that direction with your career. Whereas because there had been this ongoing conversation for a year about like, we all need to be full stack builders. We all need to like, start to blur lines. We need to see like what makes sense now in this like new world with like all of these AI tools that we now have access to. And so when I went to my manager, she was, first of all, not surprised because, I was constantly coming to her with like, hey, we should be piloting AI moderation tools. Hey, we should be thinking about XYZ. Hey, I'm really interested in this whole idea of full stack builder. Like, how could we, bring that to life for our team? And so I think for her, it just felt like the next kind of like conversation we were having in that vein, and she was super supportive. She was like, yeah, I love this. I really want our function to be seen as like leaning in here and thinking about it. And honestly, like I got feedback that before I started doing that, like leadership, product leadership hadn't really been thinking about UXR as like part of this whole like full stack builder thing.
Hmm.
And so I think that it was well received by management in that way. And then in terms of my team, I was like, hey guys, everyone's asking us to do this. I'm trying it out, like I think so for them, I think it felt like, oh, our manager is like leading in this way and kind of like helping us figure out what this might look like. So yeah, for all those reasons, I think it felt much more natural than if like 2 years ago, as a senior UX research manager, I was like, hey, I'm doing a product management project. Everyone would have been like, okay, that's weird. Why are you doing that? It just, yeah, it felt pretty different because of that.
So the organizational kind of conversation allowed you to make this shift maybe a little bit more easily than if, you had tried it a couple years earlier. But I imagine still there maybe was a little bit of tension. Did you feel anything or like see anything? Was there any weird moments that you had or
I would say two things, John. One, I would say it was like the organizational like moment, but I would also say it's the industry moment. Like if you're at a company where this isn't the norm, I'm like, you can look around and be like, hey, everyone, this is like happening at all of these other companies. Like we should also be thinking about what this means for us. So I think it was like, yes, we were hearing this like internally from our leadership team, but I actually think that like really anyone anywhere can kind of like look around at like the tech industry as a whole and the conversations that are happening and like if this is something you're interested in, pursue it because it feels like the moment is kind of giving us permission to rethink everything, how
Hmm.
things are done, what like traditional roles look like. And it really feels like now, instead of being limited by a title, we're limited by like what we can or can't do more than anything.
Totally? Yeah, I 100% agree with that. That's a really interesting way of framing it. What are you seeing broadly within the, I mean, you're saying, hey, within tech, this is happening. What are the trends that you're seeing that sort of point in this direction of like full stack? Like, what do you think is driving this transition?
I mean, I think that, we've had this like huge new technological innovation. And just like huge technological innovations of the past, it's a moment to kind of rethink what is necessary and like what still is valuable and what isn't. You think about like how clothing was made before the invention of like certain machinery and like things moved to like factory production and like certain roles that had existed before became a single role, like a machinist who's like operating this machinery. Whereas before you might have had, many different people who are participating in preparing the thread or whatever it is. So I think like, what I'm seeing, yeah, what I'm seeing is that like it's just a moment of exploration. I think that the other thing is I genuinely think no one knows. Like no one knows how this is going to shake out. Like is everyone going to become a generalist? No, I don't think so. Is every role going to be reimagined? Yes. And I think some roles will become less valuable as tools are able to kind of take on more of that work. So I think it's kind of this moment where it's like, what roles are still necessary as like individual specialized roles? What roles, can we now use these new tools to accomplish? So to me, I think like overall what I'm seeing is this moment of like deep exploration where leaders don't know and like nobody really knows. And so everyone's kind of looking around to see what's working, what are people trying, like what have you built? I just think it's like this really interesting, I think it's a really interesting moment. I also think there's a ton of uncertainty for people. Like, will my role still exist? Will it change? What will it look like? And so I think it's a moment where like as UX researchers, more than ever, like it's super important to, start with a great idea that's really based in a true problem. Like that is so core. If everyone can design and everyone can build, the only thing that differentiates us is like the quality of the idea and the actual reality of the problem, as well as things like taste, for designers. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a moment of a lot of like a lot of exploration, but also a moment that UXRs are well positioned to meet. I just think we have to come at it with curiosity as opposed to, kind of fear or like, I'm going to protect this thing.
Totally. Well, so let's talk a little bit about that fear, because I think that, the world is changing. There's so much happening. We're at sort of this inception moment where every role is being questioned, how do I evolve or how do I change or, how do I operate now in a completely new kind of operational reality when you're building product. But at the same time, you still do have deep expertise in a particular area. You're saying, okay, UXR is actually very well positioned. I agree with that because essentially I think the quality of the problem, the quality of the understanding of context is a thing that allows you to build the right stuff at the right time. But what were you afraid of losing by leaving research, if anything?
I think the thing I was most afraid of was, I guess there were two things. It's interesting. I'm like, I haven't reflected on this maybe as much as I should have. I think one thing I was afraid of losing was just that direct connection. So like as a researcher, it's like I can just set up calls with 10 members. I can have an idea for like a big project that I think really matters and make a case for it and like invest that time or hire a vendor or whatever it is. Yeah, so I was afraid, I think, of losing that like one-to-one connection. I think there's also like an identity piece, like being part of the design org and like seeing yourself in that light, like within these companies, there is this persona that's really kind of associated with each different role. And it was funny because when I officially became a product manager, I got all of these messages that were like, welcome to the dark side. And I was like, oh no. But I do think there's kind of like this ethos, right, around like each function and like designers are this and product managers are that and engineers are that. And so, yeah, it was kind of like losing, that thing. And obviously I'd invested for so long in my career as a UX researcher. I like that community has been like such a big part of my life with, my role with mixed methods and different things. So I think it was really those two things. One is like, am I going to lose that connection with members? And two, what does this mean about like my identity and who I am? And like, some of those things, I think those were some of the things that were on my mind.
Well, so where are you now with all of that? Like, how have things started to shape out?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things, so when I got this role or when I was asked to interview for this role, because that's actually what happened. I was like, let me think about it. And one of the kind of conditions that I came back with was if the whole point is that we're supposed to be adding on as opposed to, kind of just like moving to a different function, I want to still have access to all of my tools, my whole UXR research toolkit, because that's not something that other product managers have access to, but I'm not other product managers, right? Like that's kind of like this whole idea. So that was one thing, and that made me feel much better that like I would still have that access, to use my UXR toolkit and like have that connection with members. And in terms of the identity thing, I think that I think this is just something that we're all exploring. And I think like all of our roles are changing. And the reality is that, product managers come from all different backgrounds. UX designers are playing with product managers are playing with engineering. So I think it just felt a little bit less, I think it just felt a little bit less of like a permanent, this is who I am now, and more of like, hey, this is giving me a new space to explore and like the time and focus to like deeply explore it as opposed to it being a side gig on top of my other full-time job. So yeah, I think I let that go a little bit, like the fear of is this a one-way door type thing, and just tried to bring that identity with me.
Cool. Nice. I love that. You started to address this, which is like, okay, now you've got PMs that are doing a little bit of engineering, and you've got designers that are researching, and then you have researchers that are doing strategy and business articulation and writing PRDs. How do you think your research background shows up in how you are a product manager? And I'm curious if you have an example from like maybe a recent project.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I feel like honestly, this is a question you should ask the people that I work with, uh, because I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I think, I've had people kind of throughout this process like read my PRDs or things like that and be like, oh, this makes so much sense that a UXR would become a product manager. And I think it's because like, in my PRDs, I'm talking a lot about member value. I'm linking to our jobs to be done. There's like clearly a depth of knowledge there that that wouldn't be there for a normal product manager who hasn't, made that huge investment in understanding our members. But I also think that, I also think that I've gained a new level of empathy for why product managers sometimes are the way product managers are. You're thinking so much about the metrics and you're thinking so much about how we meet our target for the half. And so I think it's kind of like a two-sided sword where like I'm trying to bring that member perspective in, and I think it creates honestly like more interesting ideas for how we can accomplish some of our goals, things that other folks that might not be thinking about.
I love that. And I think it sets me up for where I want to go next, which is, how do you think about what you're doing differently now? Or, what's something that you can do now as a product manager that you couldn't do as a researcher? And it maybe bothers you a little bit that you couldn't do it before. Is it the pure business understanding, the tying actions to metrics, OKRs, all that sort of stuff, or is it something totally different?
Yeah, I think I want to go back to something my career coach told me because I love Erin. She's amazing. And one of kind of like the aha moments that I had when I was talking to her is, we were talking about like, what are the things that give you the most fulfillment? And I was talking to her a lot about like my work with mixed methods and just like the ownership and how it felt so clear to me, like the contribution that I had made. And I think one of the things that's like tricky with UX research is
Actually,
the
can I
reality.
stop you for a second? Because I don't think everyone here is going to know what mixed methods is, and I should have mentioned it as part of the introduction. But could
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit what that is?
Yeah, sure. So Mixed Methods is a podcast that I started now many years ago that's all about UX research. And I also had created a Slack community that has over 25,000 people talking about research topics. So yeah, this was a time when there was only one other UX research podcast, and I was really interested in building community around UX research. And honestly, I say that it was like my own master's program or something because I would read a text and then reach out to the person and be like, can we have a conversation about it? So, had folks like Jake Knapp on the show and many others that were really kind of leaders in our industry, and had a chance to speak to them. And yeah, Yeah, so that's what mixed methods is.
Cool. Yeah. So that's great. And you were saying that mixed methods was kind of like this, I don't know, proving ground for your maybe business sense or something.
Well, what I was saying is that the realization that I've had is that it just gave me a lot of satisfaction, like having like more ownership. Because as a UX researcher, the thing that can be so difficult is you have these amazing ideas and you do all of this work and then you like hand it off to someone else. And you're like, make this into something, please. It's so important. Don't ignore it, you know? And so, like, through those conversations with my career coach, she was like, yeah, this is like clearly something that's really like important to you in careers, like having that ownership and kind of like knowing what your contribution was and, you know, how it led to certain outcomes. So I forget what your original question even was.
Well, I'm wondering what you can do as a yeah, like I was curious if there's like a thing that you could do now as a PM that you couldn't do like as a researcher. And you're like, well, why the hell didn't I just do that before? Like I could have just done it. And I
Yeah.
could
Well, I
have
mean,
been more than what I maybe like just staying in the lane as a researcher, you know?
yeah. That's a great question. So I think there's two things. The biggest thing is like that I would say I wasn't doing or couldn't do as a UXR was reach out to my end partner and be like, hey, let's build this tomorrow. This is
Yeah,
worth it. Here's why it's worth it. Like, here's a case for it. What's the LOE here? What's the level of effort? Do we have a resource that's available? Like, just that access to resources and that kind of role on the team to be able to utilize them. Like when I first started taking on these other projects, that was like one thing that even a couple weeks in, I was like so floored by. I was like, I've been at LinkedIn for so many years and I've never ramped something. Like I've never had my name on a ramp, you know? And then I'm 2 weeks into this experiment and I already am ramping things. Like within my first month, I had an exec escalation. I had to, turn something around within 4 days. And like it just, it's just a different level of ownership when you get to not only, talk to a user or like understand the UX research deeply, but then turn around and be like, okay, and this is what we're going to change about the experience that millions of people interact with every day. That was like the
totally.
biggest difference. Yeah, was just that
Well,
ownership.
and it's a little bit bullshit, right? That we arbitrarily sort of like assign, for example, the ability to allocate researching engineering resources because you're a PM. And for some reason that it would be difficult for a researcher to do that. So let's talk actually a little bit about that tension, right? Like the ideas have stayed the same. You're technically, the same professional, but now that suddenly you've shifted into this quote unquote new role, you now have access to actually like build stuff. So let's talk like a little bit about that. Like what do you think that's bullshit? Do you think that's the way it actually should be? Like what do you imagine in the future?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is I've never appreciated UX research more than I do right now. Like when I started taking on those product management projects, the first thing that I did was I dove into the UX research like that was on the specific topics that I was working on. And it was so incredibly helpful to ground me and help me, because one of the areas that I was working in was overlapped with my like portfolio as a UX research manager, and one area did not. And so I was so grateful to the researchers that had gone so deep in understanding member needs in that space. I'll also say that as a UX research manager, my portfolio was so broad. Like I was owning the majority of the consumer experience on LinkedIn, like you can only go so deep. Whereas as a product manager, my focus is so much more narrow and like so much more specific, I would say, that I'm able to really, really like deeply understand this area. I understand what we've built. I understand what we haven't built and why we haven't built it and the limitations and how many recommendations are we pulling in for this particular email and why isn't it more and why, like there's just such a level of detail and specificity that as a UX manager, I didn't have. And honestly, as an IC, I didn't have because even as an IC, and I think this is more speaking to the idea of like ratios and stuff. Like if you had one UXR for every product manager, my answer may be very different than it is. But the reality is like you typically don't. And so I feel like UX researchers are so valuable in what they can do because you kind of like, can plant these ideas in all of these heads at once. Whereas product managers are trying to figure out these very specific details of projects and like get into the technical implementation and things like that, that like a UX researcher who's, doing these huge large scale research studies just is not going to have the bandwidth to do, especially if they're moving from like team to team or area to area. It's just like it's not reasonable to expect someone to do that. And maybe in the future it will be, as like AI gets much better at like understanding massive, massive, massive amounts of context, and we as humans get better at documenting it. But yeah, so I think was the question is, do I think it's BS of how it's currently set up?
Well, I guess the more pointed question is, you could say that actually your transition means that research wasn't valued enough because you weren't actually able to get what you needed to get done in the way that you needed to get it done given your specific role. And so, like, how do you think about it? Do you think that that's true? Like, do you think research had real influence if research can't actually build stuff and you have to become a PM to be able to build stuff?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question, John, because I'm like, I guess I'm reflecting on, is it an issue with UX research, or is it like a personal satisfaction and like what brings you joy? Because I think there are like certain people that truly love, there's so many academics who become UX researchers that like really love going very deep on a subject. I came from a background where I had been working at a startup. I had been in a role that was like part product manager, part research manager, and I had really just like dove deep, because I had an engineer tell me the best product managers that I know are the ones who know our members the best. And so I just went so deep on that. And, so I'm like, it also may be like I think it's a personal thing. Like, what brings you joy? What brings you satisfaction? Are you the person who wants to, like build the house? Or are you the person who wants to be like, hey, this is where the city should be, and here's why, and the water's over there, and you know what I mean? So yeah, in some ways I think it's really kind of like a personal question that requires some like introspection. And I don't think the answer will be the same for everyone.
I think that's totally valid. I also am wondering, like, if you're in a product organization, and this is a little bit of a pushback, which
Yeah.
is like, can you actually have people that aren't builders inside of a product organization where the responsibility is ultimately shipping product? Like, do you think that there should exist like roles where you're just providing inputs and you're not actually like driving towards some sort of concrete, you know, executional output as part of the organization?
I think that there is a role for people who are amazing at their specialty, whether it's UXR, whether it's data science, whether it's design. I hope there's always going to be a role for specialists, because I think what they do is so incredibly valuable. To your point, John, I think there should be more of a path for folks who are like, hey, here's a specific idea that I think should be built. And I do think that that's happening now. Like, you're seeing, at least I'm seeing like UX researchers who are not just saying like, here's an idea, but they're actually like making a prototype in Figma Make. And they're taking
Yeah.
that to the product team and they're having those conversations. So I think that like in the past, it felt very separate. And I think some of the tools that we have now are making it much easier to go from idea to implementation. I don't know how far that will go. Obviously, like in my case, it went pretty far. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, I think you leapfrogged in many ways. I think a lot of people are sort of like stepping into this new reality and saying, actually, like, even if I am a quote unquote specialist and I only do research, I can take that next incremental step to help people understand why my insight matters. Or I can help people understand what the insight means. You know, I now have access to tools that allow me to fully quantify business impact related to an insight as well. So I think that like you know, the ability for people to stitch together something from an initial insight or a contextual understanding towards the actual, you know, realized impact is happening faster than ever. Like every day a new capability becomes available that previously required a specialist to be able to get done. And so I think that we're at a really interesting inflection point. But I'm curious, okay, so let's imagine that, you know, let's go maybe not 5 years, maybe like 2 years from now? Do you think your title is still going to be product manager?
That's such a good question. I mean, in my like LinkedIn headline, I put product builder because I was like, product manager just already to me, it already feels too narrow. But
Mm.
at the same time, I do want to be able to like go deep into the craft of product management. Like I want to be able to deeply learn this skill. And obviously I'm playing with other things. I'm playing with Figma Make all the time. I'm playing with Claude Code. I'm playing with these things. I'm getting into our design system a bit. But I think that's the thing that I worry about is that like it feels like everyone has to do everything all at once and try all of these tools at once. And so it feels like there needs to be a balance there. But it already, to your point, it already feels like the title product manager is too limiting. Like that isn't how I see myself. That isn't how because we've been having this conversation about like identity. I see people and like it resonates with me more using this title of product builder, where it's like I might be contributing in many more ways than just management. For like my most recent PRD, I made Figma Make mocks for each of the different scenarios that, we might run into instead of just like writing out all of these different scenarios. So yeah, I don't know that it already feels too limiting. And so I can only imagine 2 years from now, like what we'll be calling ourselves.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that too. And, just kind of listening to you that say, oh, I don't call myself a product manager. I just call myself a product builder. I think there's a lot of different labels that people are using in Silicon Valley around this very idea. The one that I think is most common, or the one that I see most young people picking up, is actually just founder, which maybe isn't like the same, like inside of a big company, are you a founder of your pillar? Like, are you a founder of your like product area or your line of business? Like, not really, because that, we ascribe the term like founder to people that are like doing the 0 to 1, actually like building the business themselves. But like, I think that the roles that I'm increasingly seeing even inside of organizations look a little bit like a business owner. It looks like a founder of a particular area inside of a massive, like a place like LinkedIn is very, very big. A place like Uber is very, very big. But what you're going to have are these teams of founders that are basically just getting shit done and executing and being able to like drive business results for the broader structure. So I don't know. What do you make of that? Like, you see, do you think everybody's going to become a founder in some way, or like, are we moving more towards like building entrepreneurial capabilities inside of big tech organizations?
I think undoubtedly. We've been talking about so many people are exploring like different their own capabilities of what they can do with these tools. Like I see like the coolest things, like we just had the results of our hack week, and seeing what people had been able to do, honestly blew me away. Like stuff that I maybe didn't ever expect to see. And so, yeah, I think definitely people are becoming more entrepreneurial. My husband once said something to me around this idea of people are like water within an organization. Like you will find that like they'll often find the most efficient paths, and like people who are of the same mindset will find each other and like we'll get things done. And I feel like more and more we're seeing that as people are more empowered and kind of can like come together and form these groups that in the past they
Mm.
might not have been able to, but now you're kind of like finding so and so who has this capability and like they're really good with Claude Code, and maybe you guys are going to take on this side project together, and then maybe that becomes a real project, whereas in the past that might not have been as possible. So yeah, I don't know. I do think to your point, like AI is allowing us all to become more entrepreneurial in that it's allowing us to try new things. It's allowing us to explore ideas in new ways and like actually launch things that in the past would have taken just so much time. It wouldn't have been feasible or made sense from a resourcing perspective. So, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I like that kind of metaphor of water, and like-minded people finding each other. Like I think
The
there's a
lowest
lot there's a lot
resistance
that we can
path.
like go. Yeah, like I think that's very true, and it's less about the specialized skill set from my vantage point, and it's more about, well, what is your mindset? Are you
Mhm.
somebody that actually likes to get something done? Do you put blockers up for yourself? Do you put yourself in a lane and think that this is the only thing that you can be doing? Or are you the kind of person that says, I'll give it a try, right? And I think that organizations are going to find groups of individuals that kind of maybe share some of that. It's like, let's go mindset. Like, let's just try
Mhm.
it. Let's see how it works out. This is awesome. I think what's maybe kind of wrapping things up, Ariel, like, what's the one piece of advice that you would give somebody who's in UX? It could be a researcher, it could be a designer, it could be somebody that's in content, right? Like content strategy or content design. Like, how do you think UXers should be thinking about evolving their career path?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think I would go back to something that we had talked about earlier in the conversation and just say, it's a moment of a lot of uncertainty. You probably feel a bit nervous, potentially overwhelmed, like it feels like you're being asked to explore all these tools on top of your regular job and on and on and on. But I would also say there's more opportunity than ever for those who are, have that curiosity and like, to what you were saying, John, that kind of like, let's go, let's figure this out mindset. And as we also talked about, I think UXR is so well positioned. And if you can demonstrate that to your organization and demonstrate that curiosity and how you can kind of carry these things through, I really do think there's more opportunity than ever for folks in UX and UXR. So I would really say, as much as we can, like, try to replace the fear with curiosity, and see what's possible, because it's a crazy time to be working in tech, and it's also like really fun and interesting. And yeah, I think a lot of it is mindset in terms of like how we approach it.
This has been awesome. It's so great to catch up with you. Thank you for spending an hour with
Thanks
me.
to
Like I'm
you.
getting my like Ariel vibes back again. It's great. What are you working on right now? What are you excited about? Like any like little things that you want to let the audience know about before we hang it up?
Yes. I'm working on network growth actually at LinkedIn. So the heart and soul, I would say, of LinkedIn. And I
Nice.
think there's so much opportunity to kind of bring networking into the future. So that's my focus right now. And yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Cool. Any side projects that you're working on?
I've just been doing like I'm like, there's always little side projects. I would say, like I'm doing like a little bit of meal planning, AI agent stuff, thinking about how to teach my children about personal finance, little things like that, but
Oh, nice.
nothing that's big enough yet to throw a link in the chat type thing.
All right. Well, we'll keep in touch and thank you so much. This is so awesome. I really, really appreciate it.